Hello everyone, welcome to this SAML tutorial. In this SAML tutorial, we'll take a look at what SAML is and how it works. First, here is the agenda for this tutorial. We'll start by looking at some of the history and then look at the difference between SAML and OIDC, as those two are pretty popular protocols out there in the industry for single sign-on. And then we will try to look at why people still use SAML today. After that, we dive into the different roles of SAML. So there are mainly two roles, the service provider and identity provider. And we talk about a circle of trust, as well as the SAML metadata. And then we'll look at some of the workflows, meaning the SSO workflow and SLO workflow. So SSO is for single sign-on and SLO is for single logout. After that, we'll take a look at some demos to see SAML in action. So first, what is SAML? The SAML is short for Security Assertion Markup Language. It's basically a protocol that's developed for SSO or single sign-on, and it's based on XML. Specifically, it's used to exchange authentication and authorization information between two parties. So we're talking about authentication and authorization. Authentication is always there, but the authorization information is optional. So sometimes it's included in the SAML statement, sometimes it's not. And here we're talking about two parties. So one is the service provider and the other is the identity provider. But in general, in the practice, we will be looking at multiple parties, meaning that not only one SP, there will be multiple SPs, the service providers that come into play. So we'll take a look at details later on this part. But to understand the flow here on how SAML works, we need to look at specifically two parties. So here is the brief timeline of SAML history. So in 2001, Oasis was formed to, Oasis formed a committee to start to develop a SAML standard, because at that time, the internet has been developed a lot. Web 2.0 start to come into play, and there is a need for cross-domain single sign-on. And Oasis developed the SAML protocol for that purpose and released it as SAML 1.0 in 2002. But at that time, there was some minor issues discovered. So they released a fixed version, which is SAML 1.1 in 2003, and people started to use it. But some of the major concerns was raised regarding the security part about SAML 1.1. So in the year 2005, SAML 2.0 was released with stronger security enhancement to fix those issues. And since then, SAML started to be widely spread and then used among enterprises for single sign. Next, we look at the difference between SAML and OIDC or OAuth. Those two protocols are pretty much the standard out there in industry for single sign-on, and there's some difference between those two. So right now, OIDC has become very popular. Okay, most of the time when people talk about single sign-on, they will use OIDC. Well, I would say maybe 70% of the time, but SAML is still important out there. Because of some of the reasons we can look at later. But here we just compare the difference between those two. So SAML is XML based, while OIDC is JSON based. So that's basically the data format, how the data is exchanged between parties. And the release date of SAML 2.0 is 2005, and OIDC is 2014. As you can see, OIDC is more modern protocol compared to SAML. And complexity wise, SAML is more complex and verbose due to XML, but OIDC is simpler, is lightweighted due to its JSON format. And the use case here, SAML is used more frequently in the enterprise SSO. That means it's corporate applications, SaaS platforms, and etc. While the OIDC is more frequently used in web applications integration, mobile platform, API authentication, things like that. So those are the major difference when people talk about the OIDC and SAML. That is the use case. When to use SAML or when to use OIDC. As long as it's enterprise SSO and that there's no API or whatever involved, SAML is preferred, even it's heavier, more complex, but it's more secure as well. On the other hand, if there's API and modern web application development involved, like mobile or single page app, OIDC is often used because it's supported in that case to be integrated with all those APIs and mobile scenarios. SAML won't be able to support that natively. Okay. And after that, we look at single logout. So single logout is only supported by SAML. OIDC doesn't have the native support for single logout. And the transmission-wise, for data is usually HTTP post. There's other ways to do it, like redirect, artifact, SOAP, things like that. But most of the time, it's HTTP post that's used in the SAML workflow. And for OIDC, it's the API calls over HTTPS. And for adoption, it's widely spread in large organizations and SaaS platforms for SAML. And for OIDC is nowadays newer systems where we have APIs and REST, and the web applications come into play. I mean the single page application. They're both pretty mature protocols and scales well with enterprise or distributed SSO workflows. So in short, SAML is older, XML heavy, and excels in enterprise environment where robust SSO and federation across domains are critical. And OIDC, on the other hand, is newer, JSON-based, and tailored for modern web and mobile applications, leveraging OAuth 2.0 for flexibility and simplicity. Next, why we still use SAML today. So SAML 2.0, released in 2005, is deeply adopted in the enterprise systems and widely supported by major vendors. For example, Salesforce, Microsoft, Google, and etc. And also, it's enterprise focused. So it's tailored for complex, large-scale organization needing secure SSO across multiple internal and external applications. And its robust security feature as well, meaning it offers strong signing and encryption of XML assertions, meeting high security standards demanded by industries like finance and healthcare. Okay, it also has a mature ecosystem. So a long history of SAML has been there. That means there will be a rich set of tools, libraries, and enterprises is available for implementation and troubleshooting. And also, SAML supports a single logout, providing native SP or IDP initial logout. Also, it is good for compliance purposes, like HIPAA or GDPR. And last but not least is that many SaaS providers like Workday, Box, prioritize SAML for enterprise customers, reinforcing its relevance. So what are the SAML roles or parties? It's pretty straightforward. There are just two roles in SAML. One is the IDP, which is identity provider, and the other one is SP, which is service provider. So you can think about the SP or service provider as the client or application. And then on the other hand, the IDP is the identity provider, centralized platform to manage identity, where it can authenticate user and provide the identity information to other systems. Circle of trust. Circle of trust basically means a trust relationship has been established among different parties. Okay, so here you can say I'm adding multiple instances into the circle of trust. There are different IDPs, there are different SPs. So whatever it is, as long as they are in the same circle of trust, they can start to do SAML workflows among each other. Say, for example, for this SP, I want to work with this IDP. I can simply start to trigger that flow by specifying which IDP I want to work with. Okay, and then that SAML flow will start to trigger. The same case goes for different SP. Say I want to have this SP, say it's a different application, and I want to use this SP to work with this IDP. That works too. As long as they are in the same circle of trust, they should be good. One thing to notice is that the circle of trust is a conceptual idea, but the way to form that circle of trust is by exchanging metadata. So we're gonna look at that next. What is SAML metadata? SAML metadata is a text-based representation or XML-based representation of the entity information. That means it's either IDP or SP. And this metadata basically describe some of the critical information regarding to this entity. Say, for example, for IDP metadata, it will have some of the information like what is the ID of this IDP, and then what is the key information, like the certificate information that's used in this IDP, and etc. Same goes for SP. So for SP metadata, there will be descriptions like what is the ID for this SP, and what is the URL when SAML response is supposed to be sent to. So IDP and SP can be included in the same XML file. So basically it means that this application supports both roles. So another important concept is metadata exchange. What does this mean? So suppose we have an IDP and SP. In order to start the workflow, they need to know each other beforehand, right? So it cannot be like some random SP come here and then send a request to IDP and IDP accept it. So that's not secure. So in order for them to fulfill this SSO flow, they have to do handshake beforehand, meaning that IDP needs to know what SP is supposed to be trusted. Vice versa, SP is supposed to know what IDP needs to be trusted. To do that, they can simply exchange the metadata. That's how metadata come into play here. Okay, so the IDP metadata will be imported or added to the SP, and SP, which supports the SAML protocol, the application supports SAML protocol, will honor that information, so that when you start to trigger the SAML flow, it will follow the same metadata information to finish the flow. The same goes with IDP. IDP will need to import the target SP information into its server so that it can honor which SP is supposed to be trusted. And here we are talking about the specific entity IDs that's used to identify each party. Okay, from this SAML data, you can see here we have an entity ID, which is called https idp.example.org. slash IDP.xml. So this is NDP.id for IDP, because this is an IDP descriptor. Same goes with this one. This is an SP descriptor, and the SP NDID is this one. https sp.example.org slash sp.xml. So a lot of times you will see the entity ID is in the format of a URL. Next, we talk about the SAML SSO login flows. So there are many two login flows: the SP initialized SSO and the IDP initialized SSO. So let's take a look at the SP initialized SSO first. So here's a diagram of the SP initialized SSO. The first step is when the user is trying to access the SP, which is the client application or service provider in this case, and then the application realizes that the user is not logged in, right? Doesn't have any session on SP side. So it will redirect the user to the IDP for authentication, because SP doesn't do authentication. On the other hand, IDP will do the job. So it delegates the authentication to IDP. And then user will start to log in to IDP by validating his credentials. So specific login flows could be customized in this case. It could be like user input username and password first, and then there's a second factor come into play. So that's a different story, how to authenticate a user. But basically, user needs to log in here so that IDP understands this is a legitimate user and will establish a session for the user as well. And after that, the IDP will generate some kind of a statement or assertion and send it back to SP. So within this statement, there will be some important user information involved, and a signature, digital signature, is appended to this response so that SP knows, okay, this user information is not tampered or tweaked by some hackers in the middle, because there's a digital signature that SP can validate. As long as it's maintained its integrity, the digital signature validation will be successful. Otherwise, if this response is tweaked or tampered, SP will know that by validating this digital signature. This will guarantee the integrity and security of the data. Next, we talk about the IDP initiate flow. So the IDP initiate flow is pretty similar to SP initiate flow, with only one difference. That is to say, the flow starts from IDP instead of SP. So if we go back to the SP initiative workflow, we see that the user is trying to access the SP or the application first, right? Everything starts from the SP side. But on the IDP initialized SSO, the user is not accessing SP. Instead, is trying to access the IDP first and directly log in to IDP. And after that, the IDP will forward the assertion or statement similar to the SAML response that's generated here to SP, and SP will honor that as well. Once that signature is validated, the user information is extracted, SP will generate a user session, okay, and then allow user to log in. Okay, so that's similar to a SP initial workflow. Only difference is it starts with IDP, not SP. Now the question is, it makes sense when we do that in the SP initialized workflow. User is trying to access an SP. SP doesn't have a session with the user. It redirects to IDP for user to log in and then comes back. This makes sense, right? But when user is trying to access IDP directly and then goes to SP, it looks like it's counterintuitive. So most of the time in the industry, in practical situation, the SP initialized workflow is used. But sometimes this IDP initialized workflow is still useful. Specifically, when the SP doesn't support the SP initialized initiated workflow. Okay, so there are some situations where IDP initialized is preferred. One example, like I just mentioned, is that if SP doesn't support the SP initial workflow, it might be due to the application itself. Like when the team is developing that, it doesn't support the SP initial flow, things like that. And in this case, the user will directly access the IDP to trigger the IDP initial workflow. And with that direct access, the user needs to specify which target SP is supposed to send the response to as well when it's trying to trigger the IDP initial workflow. Next, we talk about the single sign-on. Let's try to understand how single sign-on works here. So this is not regarding SAML protocol. It can be, this concept is generalized to every protocol that supports single sign-on. So in the workflow or framework of single sign-on, there's usually a role of IDP. So in SAML, it will be just IDP. In OIDC, it would be the OIDC server or authorization server, or things like that. So they are the same concept, but just different terms, which is usually a centralized identity access management platform here. And then there will be a list of applications or clients out there, which is SP in terms of SAML. So when the user is trying to access the first application, right, and this application doesn't have the user's information, the user's session, it will redirect to IDP for login, and after that, IDP will send back a response so that the SP knows this user legitimate and then start to create a session for the user. So that's basically the SP initiated workflow, right? And the result of that is user will have a session in the SP plus a session in the IDP as well. So this is important because by one login, the SP initial login, the user will have a session in the IDP too. So this is important because in the next time when user is trying to access a different application, when this application redirect to IDP and the user already have a session, the IDP doesn't need to authenticate the user anymore. Okay, so the IDP can directly generate a SAML response and send back to SP, and SP can parse that and then create a session for the user. So in this second time, the user doesn't need to input any credentials or the logins. Okay, so this is how the SSO workflow is finished. As long as a user has an IDP, has a session in the IDP, whenever the user is trying to access whatever SP applications, if it supports this SSO workflow and it will redirect to IDP authentication, it will fulfill the single sign-on without asking the user for credentials because the session for this user is already there in the IDP. Okay, so this is how SSO works in general when you have a centralized identity access management platform. Now let's talk about single. So single logout basically means one logout request will terminate all sessions of the SPs from the SPs that has been logged in via the SAML SSO workflow. So in this SSO flow we just mentioned, when user is trying to access multiple SPs, and eventually there will be sessions established for each SP for the user, right? Because there are different applications plus the IDP session as well. And when the user is trying to log out from one SP, presumably all other SPs should be logged out as well. So that's convenient for the user because you are doing SSO for all SPs. Why not do SLO, which is single logout for all the SPs as well? So single logout basically means you want to log out a session of all SPs plus the IDP session too. And there are two workflows in the single logout as well, which is similar to the single sign-on. There's this SP initiated single logout and IDP initiated single logout. So in this diagram, we're looking at the SP initiated single logout. So when the user has been established all the sessions with the SPs, and he wants to log out to finish his stuff, he can send out a logout request to this SP. And then SP will start to think, okay, I need to do a single logout in this case so that the user can log out to all the applications or from the SPs that he has been logged in via the SAML SSO. So this SP will first log out the user. Not always the case, but usually the SP will log out the user first to kill its own application session. It depends on how the application fulfill that single logout workflow. Okay, so assuming here the SP will terminate the user session first, and then it will send a single logout request to the IDP, and after that the IDP will start to send out all the logout requests to SPs that has been established sessions via the SAML SSO. Okay, so I think I'm missing a number here. So this is step 3 and step 4 is missing. But basically the idea here is IDP will send out the SLO request after receiving the first SP's SLO request. And all this will be going in parallel for the other applications. So each application will receive the single logout request, and then it will kill the user session for each SP and return the SLO response to IDP. And once IDP receives that response, and he will return a final SLO response to SP, so that the SP knows, okay, the SP initiate logout has been fulfilled. Okay, so this is the ideal workflow. But in the real scenario, it's rare that you will have the entire flow work as expected. Okay, the reason for that is because a lot of times SSO is more important than SLO. Okay, so SSO is easy to fulfill in this case in the previous diagram, as we illustrated. But here, when we talk about the SLO, the first challenge here is each application or SP needs to support the SLO. Okay, so that is to say, when the first SP received the SLO request, okay, it needs to support that so that it can send the SLO request to the IDP. Also, it needs to support to parse or extract the information, validate the information, the SLO response that's sent back by the IDP. Okay, so this SP needs to support SLO in the first place. And on the other hand, all the other SP here needs to support SLO2 by receiving the SSO sent by the IDP. Okay, and then return the SSO response to IDP. If one of the SP doesn't support that, okay, the IDP won't be able to fulfill the entire logout flow, right? And hence cannot send a successful response back to SP. And in this scenario, the IDP usually sends some response saying, okay, only partially the SLO works for some of the SP, and some other SPs doesn't support that, so it's only partially successful in the response. And in this case, it's kind of like a defeating purpose of the single logout, because if just like 2 or 3, like you have 5 SPs logging in, right, and then there are 2 or 3 don't support the SLO, you wouldn't know like which one supports, which one does not, from the user's perspective, right? So that's kind of sometimes defeat the purpose. So in the real scenario, when it comes to logout, the important aspect is the target SP that has to be logged out, and then the IDP needs to be logged out. So that's the minimum usually we need to fulfill. And then the other SP single logout, if it's supported, that's good. If it's not supported, a lot of times it's acceptable in this case. So there'll be situations even in industry or in the practical scenario that people say, okay, we don't even support SLO in the first place for all SPs. So whenever a user needs to log out, he needs to log out specifically to each application. Okay, so that's an inconvenient situation, but sometimes easier to implement in the industry. Okay, next, let's go check out some of demos so that we can see the SAML flows in action. So the video of SAML demo will be in another video, and you can find the links in the description of this video. And see you there in another video.